I think far too often we stop a piece or a song at good, when we could take it a little bit further and make it great. So today I'm asking the question, what if your final product, what if your final score is actually just your first draft? This is something that I'm actively asking myself as I'm at that stage with the piece that I'm working on. I have found in my past that the pieces that I'm most happy with, I took this approach unknowingly. So you get a song, you get a piece where you're happy with it. You've finished all of the work, you've double barred, you've gone through, you've edited, you've done all of that stuff. But now you consider, okay, now we have our first draft done. This is not always practical, especially if you're on tight deadlines. But what we're going to talk about today, I think you can do with any piece, regardless of the deadlines. You may have to do it quicker. First, we have blank page to double bar. This is your actual first draft. This is the place that you are most likely to use compositional tropes and cliches. Things that have worked before and you know that they work. I like to refer to this period as gathering materials because you're literally just taking stuff from wherever you can, you're coming up with stuff, you're writing it down on napkins. You're collecting all of the things that you're going to need to write this piece. But the thing is that you're working fast. You're not thinking as critically, and that's good for this particular phase of the process. It's very important that you do this because you can't edit what's in your head. Maybe you can, but it's not going to be nearly as effective. But in terms of the overall quality of the final product, there's two particular problems here. The first of which would be perfectionism, and that slows down this part of the process, and so it's really not needed here, but we have a tendency, it's like, okay, I really want to get measure one perfect, but that's not the time, this is not the time for that. As we talked about before, the importance of getting to the double bar at this point in the process. If you've not seen that video, you can go watch it after this one. But on the opposite end, you might have an entire grocery list of, wouldn't it be cool if we did this thing? And a lot of those aren't gonna fit. However you got there, eventually you make it to the double bar, and it's mostly just sketches at this point. You've got an incredibly rough draft at this point as to what the piece is going to look like, sound like, all of that stuff. What we need to do here is to deconstruct your piece and rebuild it from there. And to do this, I like to analyze as a music theorist would. This particular analysis is good for when you've made it to the double bar, but it can also be really good if you're trying to make it to the double bar and you got stuck somewhere along the way. That's where I was when I was writing my first Clarinet Sonata. I had written this. And it just kind of sat there for a number of months because I couldn't figure out where to go next. And a composition professor of mine told me to analyze it like I would as a music theorist. And what I discovered was that what I had written was actually based on two cells, an 014 and an 015. And if you're unfamiliar with that particular analysis terminology, it basically means that we've got a half step and then a minor third and then a half step and a perfect fourth. So after I had removed the dirt, I had a little golden nugget to work with. I like to call this the DNA of the piece. And, you know, with DNA, it's copied into every cell of the organism. And so in the same way, this is something that's going to permeate, that's the word, the entirety of the piece. And so what I did is I took that 014 cell and I used it as the basis for all three movements. So in the first movement, it was the struggle between 014 and 015. And then in the second movement, they sort of combined to create an 0145 tetrachord. By the end of that movement, it had become an 014589 hexachord. And in the third movement, it went all the way to 12 tone as my prime row was actually two combinatorial hexachords that were built on two 014s. If you have not heard that Clarinet Sonata, I will link it in the description below, and you can go listen to it after this. You don't have to use the DNA quite as pervasively as I did in the Clarinet Sonata, but just by way of example so that you can see how we might go about finding the DNA of a piece by analyzing it like a theorist. coffee this week is brought to you by Carabello Coffee in Newport, Kentucky. Okay, so today we're looking at the final score, which is actually our first draft. This is where we would usually stop, and perhaps that's fine. Like I said, if there's timelines and deadlines that are up against you, great. However, I have found that this is where I've either, number one, played it way too safe, or number two, I've taken an okay piece to passable. I feel like sometimes we have a tendency to stop when the piece is good, when we could push ourselves just a little bit further. Because really it's there in that sort of area that our growth comes, both as composers and musicians. So once again, it's time to think like a theorist, or perhaps a publisher, or maybe a critic. You've probably used a lot of your personal tendencies in this draft, and that's not a bad thing, it's just you need to be aware of them. So once again, we're going to perform deconstructive surgery, but this time there shouldn't be nearly as much to tear down. That being said, there are definitely holes that are going to need to be patched. This is the portion that can get really, really difficult because it's where we actually have to part with material that we might have become really attached to if it doesn't serve the piece. So here are 7 questions that you can use to critically examine your composition. I've got all of these questions and further explanations for them in a guide that I've put together for this video that is in the description below, so go ahead and check that out because we are going to go ahead and kind of just entirely gloss over these 7 questions because this video is already getting really long. Now, if you come to the end of analyzing your piece and you don't find anything that needs to be changed, here are 3 things that you should try. Number 1, listen to a song that you really like, not yours, but a song that you really like and would listen to over and over, and ask yourself, what would I change about this if I had written it? Number 2, you might need to spend some time away from the piece. Like they say, distance makes the heart grow fonder. I'm not sure that works here. But taking some time away from the piece and then coming back to it can give you mental clarity about what is actually good and what is not, because in the moment, it all just kind of sounds good to you, or maybe it all sounds bad, but hopefully it all sounds good. But that time away can really kind of let the 2 things separate, what you need to keep and what needs to be taken out. And then number 3, you can ask someone else. This is really, really good. Your ears have been listening to it for a very long time. It's probably time to bring in another set of ears who can help you out. In the guide that I was mentioning earlier, I've also got information about how to seek feedback and have it go well for you. Analyzing your piece and seeking feedback are 2 really important parts of the composition process, but they're also some of the hardest. This is a piece that you've created, it's part of you. The goal of analyzing your own piece and seeking feedback is to make your piece better. So you don't want to ask for feedback from people who are just going to tear you down, for people who do not have your best interest in mind. So I've got some information in that guide about seeking feedback and the sorts of things that you can ask them when you do. So make sure to go and get that in the description below. It's on the composition resources page of my website, which is where I have, well, resources for composition, things that I have found helpful in my own composition process, and I think that you will find helpful as well. And if you're looking for even more guidance in the composition process, I also have a course online that teaches you how to write your first piece from start to finish, from ideation to final score, in 30 days. So if that sounds interesting, there's also a link in the description for that. So if you've gotten to the place that you were capable of deconstructing your final score / first draft, you've got a pretty good understanding of what the piece is. You've gotten to know it. It's told you who it is. The piece knows itself better than you do, and that's a weird thing to say until you've actually experienced it, and then it makes total sense. So you've got to let the piece tell you what it wants to do. And that's what you're going to use to fill the holes that were left by your critical analysis. So by this point, what we've done is we've taken out all of the cliches and tropes. We've taken out all of our tendencies that we didn't mean to have in there. We've taken out all of the material that we liked but didn't fit the piece. And we've listened to the piece to figure out what it wants. Like 9 times out of 10, if I've made it to this point, I've got something that I'm really happy with and really proud of, and it was totally worth it to have gone that extra mile. One other thing that I'll say here though is that I don't really consider myself to be done writing a piece until it's gone through rehearsals and had its premiere. A lot of things come up in those 2 processes that probably need to be addressed and changed. Point is, don't hold on to your pieces too tightly when you go into rehearsal. There are things that real life musicians have feedback on that are going to make your piece better, and it's going to make them happier in the process, and you want your players to like you. So let me know down in the comments, what is your process for finishing up a piece and editing it? And hopefully by the next time I see you, I will have finished up this piece that I'm working on. I'll see you next time.